Welcome back, everybody, to the final installment of my short video series where I've been ranking the best and worst tours that I've ever been on, the bands that I worked for. And this has been pretty fun because people always ask me what my favorite tours are, but I never seem to have an answer because I like all the tours I've done for different reasons, and I've never really compared them. And this whole process has been super cool for me and kind of cathartic because I've talked it all out loud, man, and I've got to do that with you guys, and I'm finally getting some answers here, and we're towards the end of the series. Now, if you've missed the first two videos, I'll throw them in the description where you can go check them out if you would like to, but if you don't want to go back and you just want to see, the big ending, what we're doing today is the semifinal and the final in one video. We're down to 4 bands. I'm going to sit here and spend a little time talking about each tour, and by the end of this, we're going to have a clear winner for my favorite tour I've ever done. So let's get started. Now, the first matchup in our bracket for the semifinals is the number 8-seeded Pat Benatar against the number 4-seeded Van Halen. And if this is your first time watching this series, we always start at the lower number first. So let's talk about Pat Benatar, or more specifically, Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo, because that is how they are billed nowadays. And if anybody's not familiar, Neil Giraldo is the guitar player and longtime husband of Pat Benatar, and he also produces their music and a lot of other people's stuff, and honestly a super underrated musician in my opinion. A lot of other people in the industry know who he is, but not a lot of regular people really know, and I gotta assume that's because Pat's name has overshadowed his for so long. But this tour for me started in 2012, I think. And it's actually funny because this wasn't one that I got a call for or threw my name in the hat to do. This was kind of one that just, got presented to me and I said, sure, why not? So I was originally going out to be the assistant merchandise manager for Journey on a big summer arena tour they were doing, where Pat Benatar was one of the openers, and the merch company that was handling stuff for Pat and Journey, same company, asked if I would like to manage all of their merchandise on the tour as well. So throughout the summer, I balanced double duty between Journey and Pat, and along the way, I started getting to know her crew really well. And then they started asking me to go do their one-off shows, which were headlining shows they did when Journey wasn't doing shows. And I got to know them more and more. And super long story short, eventually they asked me to come work for that tour full time. And it really, after one tour, went super well because I ended up working for Pat and Neil on and off from 2012 to 2015. Like whenever they toured, I would go work for them. But the first show I ever did with these guys was so funny. It was in Laughlin, Nevada at a casino venue. And there's lots of casinos out that way that have, old legacy acts at them. But my merchandise table was set up in the same room as the show. And it was the first time that I actually got to watch their sound check because on the arena shows, we were always in the concourse doing stuff. And I knew a couple Pat Benatar songs, but I remember during their sound check, I kept hearing stuff and looking up and being like, oh, I know this song. Oh, I know this song too. Holy shit, I know this song too. And I never realized how many huge hits that Pat and her husband had over the years, more specifically in the 80s and early 90s. And I started getting really excited about the tour, man. And it was, for almost 4 years, it was an absolute blast, man. Over the whole course of that time, we pretty much had the same crew. There were a couple positions that changed out here and there, but it was a crew that was very tight-knit, and we all got to know each other extremely well. And I had awesome days off with these guys. And Pat and Neil really took care of the crew as well. Like, we stayed in really good hotels. We always had good after-show food after the shows, and we had good buyouts if there wasn't good enough catering. I mean, they really knew how to take care of the people that worked for them. They also had, the same band members for years and years as well. So this one for me was just so cool because not only did I learn a lot from the other crew members that I was touring with, but I made some great friendships. There's a few people from this tour that I still talk to regularly. Some of them I see around Nashville. Some of them I've done other tours with other bands. So this one's always a special one for me because I have very fond memories of it, and I still keep up with a lot of the people on it. or that were on it at the time. Now, the number 4 seed, Van Halen. This tour for me was like the second one right in a row that was just almost a larger than life feeling. When I got the offer for this, I had just finished up being a fill-in merchandise manager on a Nickelback tour. And I got the call for this and was asked, do you want to go home and take a break? Or do you want to fly straight from the Nickelback tour and go be an assistant merch manager on Van Halen? And of course I said, I don't need to go home. Let's go. Let's do this, man. And again, it was one of those where it's just, I mean, come on, it's Van Halen. Like, let's be real. I've worked in the music industry for a while, and there are times where I get immune to some of the big names and I don't get starstruck as much anymore. But when I got offered this tour, I mean, I couldn't believe it. Like, I called my parents and I called friends and I was like, dude, I'm getting to go on tour with Van Halen. And this was a funny one because, as I mentioned in earlier videos, I came into this tour really cocky. I think at the time I was only 22 or something like that. Might have been a little older, but I was definitely in my early 20s. And I just remember like coming off of a Nickelback tour and then doing other arena tours and rock tours and stuff. I thought I knew everything and how to act on tour. And I learned very, very quickly I didn't know anything. Like, this was a tough love tour. This was a tour where I realized a lot of the things I was doing on tour in terms of like carrying myself were very unprofessional. And a lot of the people on this Van Halen tour were old school crew guys and girls that have been around the industry for decades. And here I am, just this young kid thinking he knows everything. Gotta imagine I didn't make a lot of friends right away. I even had some instances on the tour where I messed up unprofessionally, like slept in and on an alarm one day at a hotel and missed our bus call to the venue. And, you know, that's a big deal, and had to get to the venue by myself, and then knew all day everybody was looking at me like I was an idiot. And then other instances where I didn't get along with somebody or I didn't take somebody's advice. And it felt like a very lonely tour for about the first month of it, except for the other merchandise manager that I was working with. He was very kind, taught me the ropes. But after a while, I learned to just keep my head down, do my job well, take it seriously, and things started to change. By the second month of this tour, I was starting to get to know the rest of the crew extremely well. And this was a tour where we had a lot of days off, a lot of time to really hang out and get to know each other. You know, this tour was all arenas in the summer, but we would never do 2 shows in a row. We would always do one and then have at least 2 days off. So there were many times where the entire crew would get together and go out in different cities. And, you know, I specifically remember one of the last days of tour, we had 2 nights off in New Orleans. And I mean, I don't remember much of the nights, if I'm being honest, but I just remember looking back, it was a blast. It was a really good bonding moment for a lot of the crew guys and girls. And, you know, we also had days off at really good hotels in good cities where we would just sit by the pool all day and have beers and listen to music. And it was just fun all around. This one for me, more so I think than any other tour, was more cool for the crew hangs and the knowledge that I got to gain from those people rather than being excited about working for the actual band. Now, when I first started, yes, I was, like I said, super stoked to say I was working for Van Halen. But by the end of this was one of those that I look back on now where I'm like, it was invaluable. I learned so much from the crew people on this tour about how to handle myself professionally, how to take my job seriously, the do's and don'ts of touring and stuff like that. And I still keep up with a lot of these people. I mean, some of the techs, some of the lighting people, audio people, production people. If you guys have seen my video that I did about getting new in-ears from JH Audio, Charity, who's the artist rep in Nashville for JH, was my production coordinator on this tour. Somebody that I still talk to 10 years later pretty regularly, man. So out of these 2 tours, man, it's so difficult. This is probably going to be the hardest matchup on this one for me, because I would love to say that both of these equally I enjoyed. But if I got to make this simple and look back and be like, which one could I live without doing, or which one, you know, gave me the best learning experiences and opportunity, I think the winner on this one has to be Van Halen. I think I've got to move Van Halen on to the next round. And I really just want to specify that I don't want to take anything away from the Pat Benatar tour or her crew or the experience there, because it was awesome. But I think overall it was just, I learned more about my job and growing up and taking it seriously on the Van Halen tour than I did on the Pat Benatar tour. Now, moving on to the second matchup in our bracket, we have the number 7 seeded Lifehouse against the number 6 seeded Dustin Lynch. Now, starting with Lifehouse, man, you know, this was a fantastic tour for me because it was the first time I ever did a full around the globe world tour ever. And I've been to a lot of different countries with a lot of different bands, but this is the first band that actually, you know, took me on a full around the world trip. And it's something I will never forget in my entire life, because a lot of these places we went to were the first time I'd ever been there. And in some cases, I haven't been there since. Now, when I got the job offer for this tour, it was for a bass and drum tech position. And that's what I did. I was the drum tech for Ricky Wolstenhume, their drummer, and Bryce Soderberg, their bass player. And when I got the offer, I'm not going to lie, I was like, Lifehouse? These guys are still around? And if they are, they're still relevant? And it's probably because I was just removed from like the alternative rock, mainstream rock market in the US, because these guys have been putting albums out over the years, and really good albums, to be honest, man. And one of my favorite things about this tour, again, this is a common thread with this, but it was the crew. It was such a chill, relaxed vibe with everybody. Everybody knew how to do their jobs really well. Nobody stepped on each other's toes. I can't think of one time on this tour where I ever got into an argument with anybody. And a couple of them I still keep up with now. Then a lot of the other guys have moved on to do other things, as have I. But this one was just good vibes, man. And I remember just being so excited to travel to some of these places and see, you know, different cultures and stuff like that. And just the way that people reacted to music in different parts of the world. One of the specific memories from this tour that I will never forget was doing a show in the Philippines for the first time. We did a show in Manila. And the flight, which was fucking brutal, was from London to Manila direct. And if I remember right, it was like 14 hours and it was just horrible. But when we got to the airport, I remember Bryce, their bass player, looking at me on the plane and being like, "You've never been here, have you?" No. And he started explaining to me that anytime a band comes to Manila from overseas, they pretty much treat everyone like they're the Beatles. And I was like, okay, like, no way. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, you wait and see." So we get off the plane, and there's a tour manager from the Philippines there for us, and security guards and everything. And they kind of explain what's going on. And they're like, "Yeah, come with us. You know, we'll have no problems getting through and whatever." And usually when you travel internationally, you're ready with your passport to go through customs and stuff. We didn't do any of that. They literally waved us through. Our tour manager looked at the customs people and was like, "Oh, these are the band and crew from Lifehouse from the US." And they're like, "Oh yeah, they're good." We literally just went into this country without them checking like any of our stuff. And they pull us into this side room at the airport where they had like food and drinks and all this. And they were basically letting us wait for our rides to get there, to get to the hotel. And the tour manager is like letting us know, like, "Okay, just so you guys know, like when the cars get here and the vans get here, we're going to go outside as fast as possible. It's a short walk, but there are media and fans and stuff out there." And I was like, what? And I kid you not, when they brought us outside and they opened the doors and we went out to the vehicles, there were local news channels there with cameras, like the arrival of Lifehouse and the crew to Manila. And there were fans there, like screaming fans with signs like, "We love you, Lifehouse," and stuff like that. It was wild, man. I've never seen anything like that touring anywhere, really. I mean, I'll never forget that. And it was just such a cool experience being in different parts of the world and, you know, again, experiencing different cultures and stuff like that. And it was a blast. I didn't work for these guys long. It was just over a summer and a fall of 2015. So about 5-6 months, something like that. But again, it was one of those experiences that I would not trade for anything. And I had such a blast with it. And moving on to the number 6 seed, Dustin Lynch. Now, I know a lot of people that follow this channel know that I'm a metalhead, and a lot of people are familiar with a lot of metal bands. So if you're not familiar with Dustin Lynch, he is a country artist based out of Nashville, Tennessee. And when I first got the offer for this gig, I'm not going to lie, I had no idea who this guy was. I didn't listen to a lot of country. I knew the big names, like the old school names like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson and Travis Tritt, and even some of the more modern like Carrie Underwood and Luke Bryan. But other than that, I didn't know shit about country. The real reason I took this gig when I got offered it to me was because it was the first tour that I was ever offered where I was just a full-time guitar tech. That's all they wanted. They originally wanted a guitar tech for Dustin. So I took the gig. I actually quit another gig I was on to start this one because I hated the previous one so much. And that was for somebody that's not even in this bracket. But I remember the first day showing up and just looking at all the gear and thinking to myself, like, yeah, they just wanted a tech for Dustin, but I'm going to tech for everybody because that's just my work ethic. And it was like 26 guitars or something like that. And I was just like, what the fuck did I get myself into? But over the years, and it was 5 years with Dustin. I was working for him up to the pandemic and even some shows afterwards when we were doing virtual shows and small stuff. I feel like this was the tour that I probably learned the most about specifics in terms of being a tech. And man, I don't even know where I want to start on this one, to be 100% honest with you. When I first started it, again, I was guitar teching everybody on the stage pretty much. I was stage managing and I was helping out with a lot of stuff because at the time, his second record had just come out. We were still, buses and trailers, that's it, doing clubs. And as time went on, more releases came out. Dustin started getting bigger and bigger. And this is one of the few artists that I've ever worked for that I truly grew with because, as I just stated, when I first started, it was minimal stuff. We were doing 1,000 cap clubs, a couple buses and a couple trailers like on the backs of the bus. And by the time I was done working for him, it was, two buses? I can't remember, but we had all of our gear in a semi truck and we were doing arena tours and stuff. And I even got to upgrade my gear. Like when I first started out, I had this Guitar Tech tabletop thing here. And now I have this big workstation with all my stuff. And it was just a cool growing experience. And again, by the time I was done working for him, I was just teching for him and one of his guitar players because the operation had got so big that we had more people. There were more techs. There were more support roles like audio and lighting and stuff like that. And if I'm thinking about this in terms of how I've been talking about everything else, the learning, the experience, the good times, I mean, this one in terms of the fun and stuff, I still maintain no bands on the planet party harder than country bands. It's absurd. You would think that like partying is part of your job requirement. I mean, not only just the party itself, but the people. A lot of these shows, you wouldn't expect the guests that are backstage. Like a lot of pro athletes love country music, NBA players, NHL players, MLB players, professional wrestlers like WWE wrestlers. The people that I got to hang out with on this tour and the vibes and everything were so ridiculous. And I eventually got to a point where I partied myself out. This is the tour I got sober on and stopped drinking. The crew itself, most of us were super, super tight knit. We did have some people that got fired or changed out over the course of the years I was there. But for the most part, we had a pretty stable crew. Over that 5 years, we had the same tour manager, the same monitor engineer, me, the same band. Like, it was super cool. We developed this family vibe where like a lot of us would hang out when we weren't even touring. Like our old monitor engineer and myself and our wives and stuff would go downtown and hang out, and I would hang out with my tour manager and go to hockey games and stuff. And on occasion, Dustin would invite a lot of us over to his house. And not only that, we got invited to things that other bands I've worked for wouldn't include you on. So for example, every time Dustin had a #1 song on the radio, he invited everybody, the whole crew, to like the parties that the labels were throwing for the #1 parties. No other band I've really worked for has done that. Dustin definitely included all of us on everything he was doing. And again, once the operation started getting bigger and bigger, we were really taken care of, man. The days where we would have to ride the bus across country for 36 hours because flights were too expensive, like disappeared. When we would finish tours, they would just fly us home directly and stuff like that. And we were really taken care of. It was the first tour I've ever been on in my life where I was paid a full-time salary. And we've talked about salaries on tours with bands. You either get a day rate, a weekly rate, or a yearly salary. And out of all the bands I've ever worked for, this is the only one where I've had full-time pay, which is very, very rare in the music industry. Now, all that being said, I don't necessarily love the culture surrounded by country music. There's a lot of great people, but there's a lot of closed-minded people. I've heard a lot of very homophobic, racist things, not necessarily from people on this crew, but the tours that we were on. You know, summer festivals, a lot of Confederate flags flying, a lot of Trump flags flying. That's just not my thing. But all that being said, most of the people I encountered on these tours, especially with Dustin's band and crew, were great, man. And I had a good time overall. So all of that being said, that one for me, pretty easy. Moving on, Dustin Lynch to the finals. So now that we're actually in the final of my favorite bands I've worked for, I'm not that surprised that I got to this outcome after talking out loud about all of this stuff. I had a feeling that it was going to look like this when I started this bracket. The only thing that may have changed was it was that toss-up between Van Halen and Pat Benatar. It could have been either of those against Dustin, but we've got the number 4 seeded Van Halen against the number 6 seeded Dustin Lynch. And to be honest, I've talked about a lot of these bands in this series already, and I can't really think of anything else to really extrapolate on with either tour. So I guess I'll just keep in mind everything that I was thinking about, and I'll just give you the winner, and then we'll talk about that a little more. Van Halen against Dustin Lynch. I mean, I honestly got to think I just got to do the same thing I did with Van Halen and Pat Benatar, where I'm like, which tour would I have lived without? Which if I was offered them both again, which tour did I do the most growth on? Which tour did I learn the most on, have the most experiences on? And maybe it's the time difference. Maybe it's because I spent more time on one than the other. But I think the winner for this entire band bracket, and officially my favorite tour I've ever been on in my life, is going to have to be Dustin Lynch. And I know some of you are probably surprised because if you've seen my streams, you've known that I poke fun at country music a lot. And a lot of it is because I've worked in it for so long and I've seen all the funny stuff. And again, it's not necessarily my thing. I'm rock and roll, metal. That's my go-to, but I do like a lot of other music. And culturally, this was the tour where I felt the most out of place. But I will say, it's the tour where I learned the most. I had amazing experiences that I don't think I'll ever replicate. We were taken care of really well. We were treated like family a lot of the time. I mean, we did shows on these tours where they let us bring our wives out, man. Every year, Luke Bryan would have like a huge festival in Cancun at like an all-inclusive resort, and we'd be there for a week, and Dustin allowed all of us to bring our wives down. And my wife, Claire, was able to come to a lot of those, even, you know, special events and backstage at places. Like, I was able to bring my wife backstage when we did a show with Garth Brooks, like... You know, it was really cool, man. All the experiences on this tour are probably outweigh every other tour I've ever done. And I don't think I would want to trade that tour back for any of the other ones that I've ever experienced, man. So I know that was probably a little anticlimactic with the final. It was a lot quicker than the opening rounds and the quarter and semifinals. But it is, again, because we spent so much time talking about the other bands. Like, I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said about each tour that I did. Now, you know, there's probably a lot more stories that I could tell about some of these tours. I'm sitting here now, I don't know if I could repeat a lot of them without maybe somebody being like, why are you saying this? Because there's a lot of times on tour where, you know, what happens backstage stays backstage. And it's not because there's anything weird or illegal going on. It's just because these are people's private lives. A lot of these tours often make you sign a non-disclosure agreement because they don't want you telling media and other people about things that are going on, whether it's leaking information about upcoming releases or personal information. Like, you know, we as roadies have access to a lot of these people at very personal levels and probably know a lot of details about their life or their home addresses or their phone numbers that it would be very dishonorable of us as roadies to give that information to other people. So maybe one of these days I'll start a series where I do specific stories from the road, and it just ends up being funny and just sharing a little bit of my life with you guys. But for now, we are wrapped up with this band bracket. I thank every single one of you that watched all of these episodes, and even if you just watched this one because you just wanted to see the outcome. But the official 100% answer for my favorite tour that I've ever been a part of, Dustin Lynch. That's really about it, man. We're going to wrap it up here. So again, thank you so very much. If you want to jump on Twitch from time to time, we do a lot of streaming and we do live reactions and stuff like that. You could also keep up with me on Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. My handle is @TankTheTech. You may want to, because later this year, I am going back out on tour with Electric Callboy while they tour in the US. So after that one, this whole bracket might need to change around a little bit. But until then, thank you guys for watching once again. Wherever you are in the world, be safe, be kind to each other, and I'll see you guys very soon.